Strangers by Taichi Yamada. Translated by Wayne Lammers. Chapter 2. 4 or 5 days later, I got a call from Mamiya, a producer at one of the TV stations I sometimes worked for. It was evening. "Do you mind if I drop by?" he asked. Mamiya and I were the same age, 47, and we had worked together on and off for nearly 10 years, sharing credits on 6 different projects. Of those, a 2-hour special and 2 drama series had taken their place among my most important works, titles that I always included even in the most condensed resumes of my career. Because of these successes, though he had other qualities to recommend him as well, I was fond of him. Even the somewhat stiff reserve he showed seemed to agree with my temperament. After all these years of working together, he still never brought up anything about his private life, and he always remained polite and correct with me. "I apologize for intruding on you with so little notice," he said with typical formality. "Not at all, not at all. Please come in." I was delighted to see him again. He had not approached me in nearly a year. My standard practice was to fill up my schedule on a first-come, first-served basis as the calls came in. Even if I thought a more attractive job might come along if I kept myself open, I almost never turned down an offer if there was room in my schedule. So, even though I had been hoping I could work with Mamiya again sometime soon, I had already filled my plate for the coming months. "You sure took your sweet little time," I felt like grousing, but all the same, if I could possibly swing it, I was inclined to accept whatever work he brought my way, even if it meant stretching myself a bit thin. There was an actor we both regarded as one of our finest, who tended to get unruly when he drank. One night when we were drinking at a club in Aoyama with 4 or 5 others, though perhaps unruly isn't quite the right word in this case, he started doing a striptease. It wasn't really that kind of an establishment, and the shocked looks of patrons at tables nearby made it obvious that someone needed to put a halt to it. I hesitated for fear I might make him fly off the handle. But suddenly Mamiya was on his feet. I assumed he was going to try to stop the striptease, as I'm sure everyone else at our table did. Instead, Mamiya started dancing with the man. And as he danced, he too began tossing off his clothes. Before long, the two of them were taking turns belting out lines from body songs, and through it all, Mamiya seemed completely in his element. I was utterly flabbergasted to discover that he could be that way. As it happened, that was neither the first nor the last time he had done something that caught me by surprise, and each time I felt like I'd discovered something new to like in him. He lived alone, at least that was what he told everyone. Rumor had it that he owned a small airplane and spent most of his free time out at the Chofu airstrip, but I'd never heard Mamiya himself say anything about such a hobby. When we met, he spoke only of the work at hand. Since this was not uncongenial to me, I too started to consciously avoid talking about my private affairs. And Mamiya never asked me about them either. As a result, on that particular evening when Mamiya sat at my table watching me retrieve a large bottle of beer from the refrigerator and asked how I was managing my meals, I actually felt as though he was wrecking our relationship. It was not the kind of thing I wanted to discuss with him. "I saw your tower special the other day," I said, trying to change the subject to one of his recent projects. "I hear you never show up for anything anymore," Mamiya responded. Ignoring this, I remarked that I had really enjoyed the special. "I'm glad," he said as I poured him some beer, but he refused to crack a smile. He took just one gulp of his beer and set his glass down. "Don't tell me this is a sympathy call," I said. "Oh, by no means." He finally showed a hint of a smile. For a moment there I wondered if looking grim was required protocol on visits to divorced men. Not at all. "What is it then?" "Well," Mamiya averted his eyes. "Bad news of some kind?" When a television producer suddenly shows up on a writer's doorstep, you can be pretty sure it's not good news. The slot for the drama we've been developing has been given to a quiz show. Our ratings are down, so our series is getting the axe. Our leading man has been arrested for drug possession. Our leading lady just got married and refuses to kiss anyone but her husband, so can you rewrite the scene without any kissing? That sort of thing. But since I had no current projects with Mamiya, I had no idea what he could be looking so grim about. Then he spoke. "Shouldn't you be seeing more of your son?" It came as a bolt from the blue, like the lash of an undeserved reprimand. My mind attempted but failed to find the connection between Mamiya and my son. I tried not to show my unease. "Where's this coming from?" I asked. "I saw your wife the other day." No doubt he meant he had run into her somewhere by chance. I inwardly grimaced to think what she might have told him about our divorce. This was the man with whom I had tried so hard to set private matters aside. "Are you here on some kind of an errand from her?" "No. It's just. I was just wondering if it wouldn't be better to establish certain rules, like seeing your son once a month and things like that." It's not her idea at all. I was just wondering. I was taken aback at the earnestness with which he said this, the color rising a little in his cheeks. "I suppose if my boy were still a kid in junior high that might make sense," I said. "But he's 19. He's perfectly capable of coming by on his own anytime he wants." "But what about you? Aren't there times when you'd like to see him?" "I can't say there aren't, but he'd probably roll his eyes at a once-a-month rule. If I think back to when I was 19, I know I'd have been pretty bummed out if someone told me I had to sit down to dinner once a month all alone with my father." Mamiya nodded. He seemed to see my point. "But you know," I continued, "this is very gratifying. You caught me by surprise there for a minute, but it really is gratifying. I never expected you to be so concerned for me over something like this. I mean, I had you pegged for the type who prefers to steer clear of all that domestic stuff." I lifted the bottle and topped off his glass. "But the truth is, I'm as fond of domestic intrigue as the next guy. All this time I've been thinking I wanted to avoid the whole scene of people worrying about me, but now that you've seen fit to speak up, I have to say I'm gratified. Though I am disappointed that you're not here to talk about work." "Actually, there's that too." "Oh," I said, jumping to conclusions. "Well, of course there is. It'd be silly of you to come all this way just to ask about my son. What sort of project did you have in mind?" "I didn't mean it that way." "What then?" "I came to tell you I won't be able to work with you anymore." "You're getting out of producing?" "No." Mamiya sat perfectly still, keeping his eyes averted. "I don't understand," I said, forcing a smile. "I hope you're not telling me that getting divorced is cause for cutting a writer loose." Mamiya didn't answer. "I think I deserve some kind of an explanation," I pressed. Without something more from him, I couldn't make heads or tails of what this was all about. Mamiya's lips parted a little, and he seemed about to say something, but he immediately pressed them firmly back together. His jaw started trembling as though he were fighting to keep the words from gushing forth. When he finally opened his mouth again, he did so very deliberately, as if to warn, "Now listen very carefully because I'm only going to say this once. I want you to know I intend to start seeing Ayako. Ayako was my ex." I understood the words he had spoken, but they didn't sound quite real. They were simply too far removed from anything I could have expected to hear. "Seeing Ayako?" My voice betrayed my puzzlement. "Now that I know you're divorced, I can no longer contain my feelings. I hope to marry her." It was a decidedly odd feeling to hear someone else expressing such an ardent interest in the woman with whom I had chosen to sever ties. On the one hand, I wondered if perhaps I should be kicking myself for my foolishness. On the other, I felt like I knew that the man sitting before me was about to make a very wrong turn, but that I could give him no effective warning. "I see." I could think of nothing else to say. Right. That was all Mamiya offered. I could not recall the tiniest hint from Ayako of anything like this while we were going through the divorce. Then, almost as if he had read my thoughts, Mamiya looked up and said, "Ayako doesn't know." The nerve of the man, throwing Ayako's name around so lightly. Okay, so he might feel a little strange referring to her as your wife under the circumstances. But he could at least show a little sensitivity and stick with a simple she. And did he really expect me to believe that she didn't know? Right, I said. Of course not. That had to be their story anyway. Otherwise, how could Ayako justify squeezing me for all I was worth in the settlement? But here Mamiya was, barely a month later, telling me he could not contain his love for her. Nothing could convince me that she really didn't know. "You may think it's no concern of yours since you're divorced now," Mamiya was saying, but I thought it might not be quite that simple. In other words, since I had divorced Ayako, it was none of my business what he might do with her. And since he had nevertheless had the courtesy to come and seek my blessing, so to speak, I should acknowledge his wishes and butt out. That's what he really meant. "So at this point, you haven't given her any indication of how you feel about her?" "Uh-huh," he replied, leaving a note of ambiguity. "Then it's possible she won't want anything to do with you?" "That's right." "In that case, coming to seek my blessing at this stage is taking common courtesy a bit far, don't you think? You've been a very important person to me." Overblown and vain words. Clichés like that got tossed around like pocket change in the entertainment world. With some people, they could have the desired effect, so I had no objection to using them in the context of business. But it stung like a slap in the face to hear such a line from Mamiya concerning a strictly private matter. I was so important to him that he wanted to forego working with me so he could get it on with Ayako. He sat there with a look of great anguish, but he actually felt no pain at all. He felt no regrets at cutting himself off from me. It was all a game to him. He was merely amusing himself by barging in and saying these things to me. And what was more, he remained completely oblivious to what he was actually doing. Mamiya, of all people, had come to tell me that he had placed my writing and my ex-wife on scales, and that the balance had tilted to her. A profound sense of despair came over me, and I felt a sob rising in my throat. I rolled my head back and gazed up at the corner of the room, pretending to examine some cobwebs I'd been neglecting. Though surely she will rebuff me, Mamiya said, sounding rather like a stilted subtitle. I don't know why you should think that. He had to have worked everything out with Ayako already. He said he'd seen her, after all, and obviously something had come up about our son. In other words, she had kept mum about carrying on with another man, so she could squeeze every last bit she could out of me. But whining about that now would be the worst, and flying into a rage would leave a sour taste as well. I would have to find another way of showing him I was onto their dirty tricks. Let me express my deepest gratitude for all you have done for me in the past, Mamiya said very formally. Not at all, I answered mechanically. It was all I could do to keep from exploding. I'm terribly sorry, Mamiya said with a deep bow, then added, I think I'd better be going. It's too painful to. He sounded on the verge of tears. Good grief. I inwardly rolled my eyes. This is turning into a regular soap opera. What happened to all our efforts on and off screen to avoid such sappy treacle? But Mamiya had crossed on over to the other side, all the way into the world of melodrama. Goodbye, then, he said, rising to his feet and performing another deep bow. Good luck, I heard myself saying stupidly. At this rate, I would soon be joining Mamiya on the other side. I hope you can forgive me, Mamiya blurted out as he fled for the door. Everything seemed to follow the rules of conventional melodrama. Now he was putting on his shoes. When he was done, he would stand erect and act like he had one last thing to say. But he'd be too choked up to speak, so he would simply give another little bow and turn to the door as though shaking himself free of the emotions bottled up in him. This was how it was done in the hackneyed world that he and I had tried so hard to avoid. I watched as Mamiya performed exactly as I had anticipated. The door closed behind him. After what had transpired, I was hardly in the mood for more company that night. The apartment remained exactly as it had been when Mamiya departed. I had neither grabbed his glass and thrown it at the floor in a fit of pique, nor calmly turned my attention to preparing and eating dinner. Rather, I had simply wandered into my bedroom, the only other room in the apartment besides the one that doubled as living room and study, and flopped down on the bed. I was still there, listening to some music on FM, when the intercom chimed. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand and saw that the time was 10:24. Who could it be at such an hour? No one from the stations I currently had dealings with ever dropped in unannounced. The security system at the main entrance downstairs generally thwarted door-to-door salespeople. Now and then one of them managed to slip in after a resident had passed through. But then they usually got turned away when they announced themselves through the intercom at the individual apartments, so I couldn't imagine that they did much business. There were, of course, quite a few people who knew my address here, and theoretically any one of them could have chosen to drop in, but nobody I could think of was likely to come without calling first. A possible exception was the lady friend who used to visit me here, but given how we'd parted, I doubted I would ever see her again. We had not been a particularly good fit, she and I, even as sexual partners. I picked up the handset to the intercom. Yes. Hello. It was a woman's voice, but not one that I recognized. Who is it? I'm at your door. I live in the building. The intercom made the same sound whether the visitor rang in from the security panel at the main entrance or from the hallway right outside the door. That was why she had felt the need to clarify. "Just a moment, please." I sighed wearily. I didn't know whether she wanted to hit me up for a contribution or ask me to sign a petition, but I was in no mood for anyone's spiel. Even the note of youthfulness in the woman's voice failed to dispel my annoyance. But I didn't suppose I could just leave her standing there either. I opened the door. Oh, it was the woman I had seen pass through the lobby several nights before. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said. She wore a cotton house dress, pale green with a large, boldly sketched flower on the front. Of course she was disturbing me, but I couldn't very well say so. "What is it?" Her face was unnaturally white. Her makeup seemed a little too heavy for a woman in a house dress. "Did you know?" she said, as if trying to pique my interest in a choice morsel of gossip about someone. "Did I know what?" "That by around this time most nights," she said, averting her eyes, "you and I are the only two people left in the building?" Her eyes returned to meet mine. I felt a rude jolt, like I had been bitten by a centipede. When a woman learns she is alone in the building with a strange man, wouldn't the more normal response be to double lock her door and offer up the most vigilant guard she could muster? "No," I said in a tone that suggested I could hardly have cared less. She averted her eyes again and seemed to be bracing herself against the icicles in my voice. Had I been my usual self, I might have hastily added a warmer remark of some sort to make amends, but I was in a foul mood that night. I stood there without a word. "That's all," she finally said, her tone suddenly forlorn. She thrust a paper bag at me that contained a bottle of some kind. "A little something to mark our new acquaintance," she sniggered self-derisively. Then quickly, as if to banish her snigger, she added in a much brighter voice, "It's champagne." A half-empty bottle of champagne. I opened it, but I couldn't drink it all, so I thought maybe I could share it with you. "If I keep it until tomorrow, it'll just go flat." She giggled gleefully. "That's very kind of you, but—" I forced a smile, but did not move. "Oh, I'm not celebrating anything. It's nothing like that," she said. For the first time, she sounded a little drunk. "It's just a bottle someone gave me a couple of years ago. I happened to come across it the other day and put it in the refrigerator thinking I'd go ahead and drink it, and tonight I finally opened it. I'm drunk, aren't I? I get tipsy right away. A third of a bottle and I'm completely sloshed." She giggled again. "Otherwise I wouldn't dare do something like this. Anyway, do you mind?" "Excuse me, do you mind if I come in?" Yes, I certainly did mind. She was an attractive enough woman, but I bristled at her brazenness, asking such a thing without the least regard for my convenience. I was still groping for what to say when she spoke again. "I just couldn't help myself," she blurted out as if with her dying breath. I have no idea what came over me, but tonight, as I sat there in my empty apartment, all of a sudden I couldn't stand being alone anymore. So I don't know how many times I changed my mind, but in the end, I decided to come. I mean, think about it. In the middle of the night, there's only one or two of us in the whole building. It's scary. I'm on the third floor. You could come to my place instead if you'd like." The alcohol seemed to be making her a little crazy. I'm in the middle of a rush job. My foul mood had reasserted itself. The gall of the woman. Not the woman standing before me now, but the woman I had claimed as my wife until barely 30 days before. "You're working," the woman standing before me was asking. "Pardon, you're working right now?" "Yes. I'm trying to wrap up a rush job." After demanding our 6-year-old house and the land it was built on, as well as the securities I'd made the mistake of placing in her name and all of our savings, Ayako had made a grand show of generosity in front of the arbitrator by saying, "I suppose he'd like to make a clean break, so I won't ask for educational expenses for our son." Lo and behold, Mamiya had been lurking in the shadows all along. "I see." The woman before me was nodding. "Huh. If you have to work, I guess this isn't a good time." "I'm afraid not. Please forgive me." "No need to apologize." I reached for the doorknob. "Oh," she exclaimed, but I closed the door before she could say she still wanted to leave the champagne with me. Even as I watched her image vanish, my mind had already turned elsewhere. Renewed anger at Ayako and Mamiya swelled like a massive wave within me. I sent the deadbolt home with a loud clack. I returned to my bed and turned the radio back on. Almost immediately, a feeling of unease crept over me. My mind raced. Maybe I should have asked her, and after all. When a person suddenly shows up talking like that, don't you have to figure something pretty serious is going on? Or was that true only for me, and for her it was nothing more than a lark? Then again, she also said she didn't know how many times she had changed her mind. What if she does something rash because I gave her the cold shoulder? What if her crushing loneliness makes her kill herself? "Oh, get a grip," I told myself. She isn't going to die. Her face didn't have anything like that written on it. I got up and opened the door again. The hallway stood empty. I listened for telltale sounds, but all I heard was the roar of the traffic rushing by outside. "I'm sorry, but I simply don't have time for other people's troubles right now. I've got too many of my own." Making lame excuses, I retraced my steps to the bedroom. I could not sleep. I poured myself a nightcap of whiskey. Thoughts of the woman continued to tug at me as the alcohol slowly took its effect, but for the most part my mind did battle with the shock dealt me by Mamiya and my ex-wife. Morning arrived. Daytime noises gradually brought the building back to life. The hollow clicking of heels on concrete floors, first in one direction, then another. Doors latching shut. Telephones ringing. People's voices. The rising tide eventually reached next door as that apartment, too, began to stir with the activities of office staff going casually about their day's business, and the next thing I knew it was almost noon. I really ought to make sure the woman is all right, I told myself, but I was too weary to do anything about it.